It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. England through to the knockout stage of Euro 2024, topping the group after a lacklustre 0-0 draw. Also tonight, the Conservatives suspend 2 candidates over alleged bets on the general election, as Labour is also swept into the row, suspending one of their hopefuls after betting against himself. Protesters storm Kenya's parliament with reports that 8 people have been killed after police clashed with crowds. The flight to freedom. The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, could be a free man within hours as he strikes a plea deal with US authorities. And a ceremonial welcome for Japan's Emperor and Empress as their state visit begins. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. Well, the whistle has just blown on England's final group stage game of Euro 2024, with Gareth Southgate's team through to the next round. In the end, it wasn't quite the game that fans were hoping for, with a lacklustre 0-0 draw in Cologne, and questions remaining over the team's performance. Let's go live now to Cologne and our sports correspondent, Rob Harris. So, 0-0, Rob, not the performance that fans and pundits had wanted, but England through, as we knew, and even topping the group.
Yes, the performance was pretty dreary, but England did keep a clean sheet. They finished the group unbeaten, and this 0-0 draw was enough to secure top spot. But the fans around me are leaving very disappointed. They booed the team off the pitch yet again. We even saw plastic cups, empty ones, being thrown at Gareth Southgate as the team went round the pitch to greet their fans. The fans who expect so much more from the team. This is a Slovenia side that have never won a game at the Euros before. England did dominate the possession, but they just could not create any opportunities. They looked very fatigued. We saw the limited impact that players like Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham managed to make. They just couldn't press and attack the Slovenian goal, and it will raise questions about just how far England can go in this tournament. Can they win the Euros for the first time? For the fans who've come here with so much expectation. Cologne was scorching, and England were feeling the heat. All the energy lacking on the pitch was here. The team wants crowds to cool off, to relieve the pressure. And qualification for the knockout phase had already been secured. This was about completing the group against Slovenia. It was nervy. There were fleeting flashes of tempo. This ended with Bukayo Saka putting the ball in the net. An offside was spotted. It was all too...
Apologies, Rob, your sound there not quite easy to hear. I was just going to ask you, there's been a bit of a battle, as you know, between pundits and players. Are there questions now for Gareth Southgate? Is it not working?
Well, they're not clicking, they're not gelling on the pitch. He did say that they were going to hit the reset button to attempt to try something different, but it wasn't evident until really the changes came in the second half. There was Kobe Mainoo who made an impact that we saw on the pitch, but they can look forward now to the last 16. The format means England aren't too sure who they will be playing. It could be the Netherlands. What is certain is they're going to be in Gelsenkirchen on Sunday. That's the destination of the match. So there is quite a bit of recovery time for England because it was pretty hot here at times tonight in Cologne. So the hope will be that they can recover and there's a bit of time together as a squad. But we heard a lot of criticism after the 1-1 draw with Denmark in the previous game, particularly from former players. We can only imagine that scale of the critiques of the team's performances will only increase after this, and the fans around me are making their feelings well known about how they feel about Gareth Southgate and his tactics.
Yes, and we're certainly going to hear from the players shortly, aren't we? Hear their reaction, what they think they need to do. But by the luck of the draw, they've gone through top of the group. What does that mean now?
Well, it does mean that they're going to play a third-place team, and given how results panned out with the Netherlands losing, they could be one of the sides, although we won't be too sure until after all the groups are complete tomorrow night, just to work out how things will shape up in terms of how it goes forward. So, you know, we talk about the Netherlands losing. The positive is England are unbeaten. Of course, they are trying to reach the final as they did in 2021. They have quite a high bar to match as well, because the Lionesses, of course, are European champions. That's something that Gareth Southgate's men are trying to do. But very little that we've seen so far suggests that they have the impetus and the verve to be able to do it. But these are the fans who are... They're able to celebrate going through as group winners. That's certainly one thing to be positive about. And we've seen teams in the past that have not even won a game in the group stage, like Portugal in 2016, and they still went on to win the tournament.
Yes, the group stage always tricky for England, we remember well. We'll let you grab a couple of those fans, Rob. In the meantime, millions of people, of course, have been watching the game here in the UK. A fan zone in Newcastle broke into celebration just 20 minutes into the game, but the joy was short-lived when the goal by Bukayo Saka was declared offside. Well, this the reaction in Dalston and East London perhaps sums it up as the match came to an end with a 0-0 draw, but with England still, as we said, topping their group. And this, the crowd at a fan zone in England's home of football, Wembley. Well, our correspondent Danielle Henry is at one of those fan zones at Wembley Stadium. What's the reaction and verdict there then, Danielle?
Well, I think the reaction really is one of disappointment. This has emptied out very, very quickly, but I've managed to hang on to one fan, Andy, who stayed right to the end. We had a chat before the game, Andy. You were quite optimistic. Based on what you've seen, are you still optimistic now?
A little bit. Like I said earlier, very defensive. A little bit annoying that Gordon didn't come on. The substitution a little bit too late for me. And the position played by Foden should be a bit of 10. A little bit annoyed by Southgate's negative, but it's a little bit sour in my mind.
Do you get the sense that he is managing to get the best out of this collection of players?
In a word, no. I think he's trying to get through to the next phase of the stage, trying to get through to the next stages, but he's not getting the best out of the players he's got on the field. He's got people like Anthony Gordon, needs to play. Phil Foden's a 10. He plays a 10 for City, he needs to play a 10 for England. Jude Bellingham needs to drop back, help Declan Rice out a little bit more. But that's just my persona. That's what I say. I'm not the England manager.
Well, the thing is, when you get results like this, we all feel like the England manager, don't we? And, you know, England, they have managed to get through to the last 16 after all. They will be in the knockout rounds of the Euros, but whether or not they're going to be able to deliver, whether or not they're going to be able to get beyond that, well, performances like this do continue to raise questions rather than provide answers, I think.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel, with reaction there, certainly. So let's take a look at what England's path to the final could look like. England will next play on Sunday at 5 p.m. in Gelsenkirchen. We don't yet know who they'll face. If they win that game and make it through to the quarter-finals, the match will be on July the 6th at 5 p.m. against Switzerland or Italy. A win in the quarters would see them through, of course, to a semi-final game. That's in Dortmund on July the 10th at 8 p.m. And the Euros final will be on the 14th of July, also at 8 p.m. Full coverage, of course, of those games as we watch the progression. Now, more than a week after allegations first surfaced, the Conservatives have suspended their support for two candidates accused of betting on the date of the general election. Craig Williams and Laura Saunders will still appear on the ballot paper next week, but will no longer have the support of the party. If they're elected, they would sit as independent MPs. It comes as Labour has also been dragged into the scandal. Now, one of their hopefuls has been suspended, this time for betting against himself. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has this report.
Sorry, you want me to say?
For days, asked what action they can take on the betting scandal, top Tories have been very clear.
Given the nature of the inquiry, it wouldn't be right for me to comment.
The appropriate thing to do is for the appropriate investigating authority to conduct that investigation.
People should enjoy the benefit of whatever doubt there is.
Well, today, that changed. Craig Williams and Laura Saunders, both under investigation for allegedly betting on the date of the election, had their support from the party withdrawn.
This guy loves them, and every time I sit...
Craig Williams was Rishi Sunak's closest aide in Parliament, always at his side.
He asks me questions every minute of every day because he's next to me for most minutes of every day.
Suspended candidates will still appear on the ballot but won't have any party backing. In a statement, Williams vowed to fight on.
I committed an error of judgment, not an offence, and I want to reiterate my apology directly to you.
Labour initially gleeful.
It's taken Rishi Sunak the best part of 2 weeks to act on this. That is just weak leadership.
But later in the day, they suspended one of their own candidates. Kevin Craig put under investigation by the Gambling Commission, not for betting on the election date, but for betting on himself to lose his race.
We have a chance to do things differently.
It's not just politicians. The Gambling Commission has told the Metropolitan Police it's investigating 5 officers for allegedly betting on the election date. Last week, one of the PM's close protection officers was arrested over alleged bets. But with just 9 days until the election, this is still a political crisis.
From the cabinet downwards, the question across the Conservative Party is, how did this decision take so long? Is it because the Prime Minister was too attached to his close aide, Craig Williams, to cut him loose? Is it because he just didn't see the scale of the danger? Either way, candidates don't like the answer, but the damage with voters has already been done. How much have people noticed this story?
Well, this is the #1 issue, the #1 story with the British public, according to our AI-powered cut-through tracker. It's bigger than the Euros, it's bigger than any other story around the general election campaign itself, and it's been that way for the past 4 days.
The grandeur of a state visit from the Japanese emperor. For Rishi Sunak and his ministers, a world away from stories of sleaze and grubby bets. They might not have many more moments like this. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
So these are the 7 candidates standing for election in central Suffolk and North Ipswich on the 4th of July. And on your screen now are the full list of candidates running in the Bristol North West constituency. And then this is the full candidate list for Montgomeryshire and Glendower constituency. Well, meantime, Sir Keir Starmer has been out campaigning today with a focus on knife crime. The Labour leader was joined by Idris Elba to speak to families of victims of knife crime about how best to tackle it.
It's a societal issue. We need you to say that really loud.
It's a moral mission.
It's a moral mission, and I think it's really important that you say it loud. And whether you get it or not, we still want your voice. Still need that voice because it's our country. We want to fight together. We've got to do it.
To Kenya now, at least 8 people are reported to have died and dozens more have been injured after police opened fire in the Kenyan capital. The country's parliament has been stormed by protesters angry at MPs for passing a controversial finance bill which would raise taxes during a cost of living crisis. The Kenyan president called in the army and has described the demonstrations as a national security threat. Warning, this report from our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bakhir, contains images you might find distressing.
Speak up, speak out, his T-shirt says. But those who speak out on the streets of Nairobi face abduction, gunfire, and tear gas. Kenya's capital descended into chaos after anti-tax protests were met with brutal force by the police. And the tax bill they marched against was passed in Parliament. This is Parliament now, battered by the protesters who managed to raid it, to express their rage and betrayal, while members of Parliament took cover for 2 hours. Some protesters never made it to Parliament. Nairobi's main public hospital says it received 125 casualties. 2 were dead on arrival. Others lay dead in the streets. A dark warning to protesters walking by and those being treated in makeshift clinics.
The young people came out in large numbers to protest against that bill, but the National Assembly passed that bill last week, and still today they did vote in favor of the bill for the second reading. That is what has sparked outrage from the Kenyan people.
But Kenya's President William Ruto has doubled down, calling the events treasonous and deploying the country's army to support the police.
Today's events mark a critical turning point on how we respond to grave threats to our national security. I assure the nation that the government has mobilized all resources at the nation's disposal.
All this just as the US officially designated Kenya its major non-NATO ally, and Kenyan police landed in Haiti to lead an international peacekeeping force to tackle gang violence. But now President Ruto is set to keep the peace in his own country on his own terms, no matter the cost. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
The WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange could become a free man within hours after reaching a plea deal with the United States. It's a dramatic end to a years-long battle over his extradition, which saw Mr Assange detained in a British prison for 5 years. Well, in the last hour, his flight has landed on the Pacific island of Saipan, where he's expected to formally plead guilty to an espionage charge before making his way home to Australia. A warning, this report from our US correspondent James Matthews contains flashing images.
It's been a long journey. 14 years on, freedom now beckons for Julian Assange. This was the charter flight that will end in the northern Mariana Islands. It's the US territory in the Pacific, where he plans to plead guilty in an American court and then walk free.
We've been so focused on actually getting him out of prison, and I think now is the time for him to rest and really recuperate, be with his family, and have a bit of a quiet life for a while, like we all deserve.
Julian Assange was behind the biggest data breach in US history. His organization WikiLeaks stole US diplomatic cables and military files and put them online. Come on, let us shoot. They included video like this, an attack by US helicopters in Baghdad that killed a dozen people, including 2 Reuters employees. Supporters of Assange say he was a journalist, justifiably exposing truths. US authorities said he'd committed espionage and endangered lives. To avoid extradition to America, Assange sought asylum in London's Ecuadorian embassy, until he was removed and taken to Belmarsh prison as the US pursuit of him continued. These are the court papers that should bring that to an end. He plans to plead guilty to 1 count of conspiring to disclose defence documents. Julian Assange had been facing 18 charges. Technically, a trial and conviction here in the United States could have resulted in a prison term of 175 years. Under the proposed plea deal, he'll be given 62 months, but he'll walk free, as that's time he's already served. Prominent in the effort to free the native Australian has been that country's Prime Minister. In its parliament, he welcomed the outcome.
Regardless of the views that people have about Mr Assange's activities, the case has dragged on for too long. There's nothing to be gained by his continued incarceration, and we want him brought home to Australia.
Julian Assange is due to make a Wednesday court appearance. He'll plead guilty to breaching the Espionage Act, and it will change his circumstances. From the headline maker at the heart of a hot story to the spy coming in from the cold. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
A former senior engineer who was one of the architects of the Horizon IT system has told the Post Office inquiry that he believed the software was working well. Gareth Jenkins worked at Fujitsu, the firm behind the IT system at the heart of the Post Office scandal. His evidence was used in the prosecutions of many wrongly convicted sub-postmasters. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso spoke to one of them today.
Gareth Jenkins was the architect of the Horizon IT system at the heart of the Post Office scandal.
Part of the cover-up. Are you planning on telling the truth today?
I swear by Almighty God
That the evidence I shall give.
that the evidence I shall give.
The retired Fujitsu engineer told the public inquiry despite hundreds of wrongful convictions, he still has faith in the system he built.
Horizon, both legacy and online, was working well in your view?
Most of the time. There were clearly problems during the pilots in both cases, and there were clearly individual problems that affected individual branches, and I'm sure we'll come on to those at some time. But in general, then I felt that the systems were working well.
As well as building Horizon, Gareth Jenkins defended it in court, acting as an expert witness in Post Office prosecutions of sub-postmasters, including Seema Misra. She was wrongfully convicted in 2010 after he failed to disclose that he knew the wider system contained bugs and errors.
Do you remember him giving evidence in your trial?
I do, because I was really happy and really hopeful. There's an IT expert from Fujitsu coming up and all that. It will be all good. Why didn't?
And what happened?
Nothing, because he protected the brand, and he succeeded in that. I was sentenced to prison 15 months.
And you think his evidence was the reason that you went to jail?
Yeah, of course.
Now under police investigation for suspected perjury, Gareth Jenkins said he told the courts what he believed was relevant.
You would know that witnesses, when they come to give evidence, are asked to tell the truth and the whole truth.
Yes.
Did you think you were only required to tell the truth in your witness statements?
I was talking about those aspects that were related to the Horizon system, and I believe I did tell the truth and the whole truth as far as the Horizon system was operating in the specific branches at the specific times that I looked at data.
But you didn't feel under any compunction to volunteer information about other faults or system defects about which you had not been asked?
I didn't think that they were relevant in those particular cases.
Mr Jenkins, will you apologise to Seema Misra in person?
Gareth Jenkins will return to the inquiry to give evidence for another 3 days. Paul Kelso, Sky News, at the Post Office Horizon inquiry.
A court has been told how a security guard accused of plotting to kidnap, rape and murder television presenter Holly Willoughby was found with millions of pictures of celebrities. 37-year-old Gavin Plum was arrested in October after talking about his alleged plans to an undercover US police officer. Mr. Plum denies the charges. 4 men have been arrested on suspicion of aggravated trespass at Rishi Sunak's home in North Yorkshire. Police say officers had reached the men within 1 minute of them entering the grounds. They were detained at 12:40 before being escorted off the property and arrested. The arrests are understood to be linked to action carried out by the protest group Youth Demand. Specialist search teams with dogs have been brought to Tenerife from Madrid to help with the search for missing British teenager Jay Slater. The 19-year-old was last seen on Tenerife in the morning of Monday the 17th of June after attending a music festival the night before. For the first time ever, samples from the dark side of the moon have been returned to Earth by a Chinese space probe. It's hoped the volcanic lunar soil will help shed light on the formation of the moon, as its far side is completely different to the side we see, having always faced outer space. The Emperor and Empress of Japan have been given a ceremonial welcome on their state visit to the UK. They were greeted by the King and Queen on Horse Guards Parade with a display of military pomp and pageantry before attending a state banquet this evening. This 3-day state visit is somewhat unusual, coming, of course, in the midst of a general election, as our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
Making their way into the state banquet, the tiaras had survived, where other more political elements of this state visit had not. And yet the guest list still felt like a who's who of the election campaign. The King even using his speech to hail the importance of democracy.
Today, as we face a world in which these principles are ever more challenged, our shared values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law are more important than ever.
Welcome back. You both know here very well.
Earlier in the day, Prince William's meeting with the Emperor and Empress could not have been any warmer.
You put on the hot weather for me. So it's quite warm out there today.
Not really the best day to be standing out in it, and yes, that is the King tapping his wrist as things were running a bit late. Eventually, they arrived. Rishi Sunak's decision to call an election had meant the state visit was almost called off. It was decided the public display of affection must go on. The King with a hand of support as they inspected the Guard, the show of royal friendship significant for both the UK and Japan when it comes to riding out times of geopolitical uncertainty. Following behind the Queen and the Empress, the allergy to horses, the reason for the face mask. Arriving at Buckingham Palace for lunch, there were 2 members of the family missing. In Bristol, Tim Lawrence was visiting Princess Anne after she suffered concussion from being hit by a horse. Her husband telling reporters she's doing fine, slow but sure. We don't know for certain, but it looked like William and Edward were talking about her as they continued to play hosts. Whoever else was at the banquet and whatever roles they may hold in the future, at the centre, 2 monarchs, once heirs, who've spent their lives learning how symbolically important these moments can be. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
Well, let's take you back to Germany now, with apologies for the sound issues at the top of the programme. We can now bring you Rob Harris's report on England's game this evening.
Cologne was scorching and England were feeling the heat. All the energy lacking on the pitch was here. The team wants critics to cool off, to release the pressure. England! England! And qualification for the knockout phase had already been secured. This was about completing the group on a high against Slovenia. But it was nervy. There were fleeting flashes of tempo. This ended with Bukayo Saka putting the ball in the net, but an offside was spotted. It was all too pedestrian and predictable, with little pressing. When there was a threat, Harry Kane couldn't connect. Change came at half-time, and Kobe Mainoo made an impact. It was all England, but with the goal threat missing. They are still unbeaten in Germany, and this 0-0 draw was enough to go through as group winners. But another lacklustre performance raises doubts about how far they can go in the Euros. Rob Harris, Sky News, Cologne.
Well, despite that 0-0 result, England still managed to finish top of Group C after another 0-0 result between Denmark and Serbia. Elsewhere this evening, France had to settle for second place in Group D after already eliminated Poland held Les Bleus to a 1-1 draw. That was despite a masked Kylian Mbappe returning from injury with a goal. Well, Marcel Sabitzer's late strike saw Austria edge a 5-goal thriller against the Netherlands and send them through to the knockout stage as Group D winners. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the former Conservative advisor Salma Shah. Welcome to both of you. And certainly among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times. Its headline, Labour dragged into betting scandal, the paper says, after candidate backs himself to lose. That and plenty more, of course, when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. A disallowed goal from Bukayo Saka leaves England with a 0-0 result against Slovenia in the Euros tonight. But a matching result between Denmark and Serbia meant England finished top of the group. More than a week after allegations first surfaced, the Conservatives have suspended their support for two candidates accused of betting on the date of the general election. Labour also suspending one of their candidates over a gambling commission investigation. And Kenya's president has vowed to restore normalcy following protests at the parliament. Several demonstrators have been shot dead and fires were started inside the parliament building after politicians voted in favour of a controversial tax bill. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Salma Shah. Lovely to see both of you. So, as ever, we'll kick off with the front pages. More questions than answers, the Daily Express talks about, but there is the FT, first of all. Labour dragged into betting scandal after candidate backs himself to lose. The picture there of Julian Assange. Onto The Guardian, Tory faces investigation as election betting scandal grows. So there we are, leading on Julian Assange. Freed Assange is heading home. A £400,000 bill, the paper says, for jets as the saga ends. Daily Telegraph, Streeting, quoting Wes Streeting, Labour lost the trust of women over trans issues. Well, let's take a look at some of those newspapers, shall we? What are we kicking off with then? Let's start with the football, shall we? More questions than answers. The suggestion is lacklustre is the headline for many a newspaper, obviously. England win group, but latest failure to fire increases pressure on Southgate. Anyway, top of the group, but is the point, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's great that we've gone through. I am not the greatest authority on football, but I have followed this enough to know that the criticism has been that the players have lacked energy, and this result of us being in the final 16, being the top of the group, should be cause for celebration. But by all accounts, it was a goalless draw. If we're going to have to, we're going to have to play a lot better if we're going to go further than this, really.
Well, I've discovered that I'm probably going to have to brush up on my maths to understand all these points and things and what it means and, what this means for the Danes now. So it's been interesting to have to review it for this evening. But there's a couple of other back pages that we've been looking at as well. Not just the Eye that says more questions than answers, which I think is a nicer headline that we've had, but we've also had the Daily Express that I think we're going to move on to, which is... there's something in this that really struck me as quite sad, is that Gareth Southgate's men were jeered off the pitch, which is really unfortunate, given that obviously they've been trying, and perhaps sometimes...
obviously they've been trying.
Obviously they've tried to get to the top of the group. And they've worked quite hard at it, so why are the fans so disappointed?
Because it was quite lacklustre, I think. But hey, we're through, the summer continues.
Some games are. We're going through a general election campaign that's a bit lacklustre as well. That's my World Cup, that's my football.
I don't know if we've got the Daily Express back page as well. Trying to get the back pages in. Obviously, it comes in late. Game doesn't finish till quite late, does it?
Yeah.
Lions toil, but top the group, stuck in the slow lane there. There'll certainly be questions of the players. There'll be questions of the manager as well. But actually, they roll on to Sunday, perhaps with some answers. And we'll certainly see. England moved into the last 16 of the Euros as group winners, but Gareth Southgate's men were once again jeered off the pitch.
Yeah,
this is the difficulty, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you want to get to the election then? And let's move on to the FT front page, shall we? Labour dragged into this betting scandal after a candidate decided, the allegation goes, to bet against himself.
Yes. I mean, really. Apparently this happens quite a lot. But a Labour candidate who's also a major Labour donor, who's made a £100,000 donation to the party, this man, Kevin Craig, he's in a seat with a massive majority, but it's a Tory majority, and it's a Labour seat because of defection of the Tory MP to Keir Starmer's side. He bet against himself. He has been suspended from the party. He is no longer a candidate, and he is no longer a member of the party. I mean, this is not the same as what the allegations about what the members of the Conservative Party have been doing, because there's no question of the idea that, allegedly, that he had inside knowledge of the election date. He wasn't gambling on the election date. He was gambling on himself losing. Nonetheless, this is something where
this is a bad look rather than anything.
Yes, but footballers, we don't allow footballers to bet on games that they're going to be playing. I don't think we should allow MPs to bet against themselves.
Where's the rules on this? This is the point.
There are no rules on it.
There are no rules on it. So I actually am a little bit more sympathetic to Kevin Craig, because it's not like he was taking insider information and placing a bet, as there's been allegations around others. This is something that has happened before, almost jokingly, where people talk about betting against themselves. There's normally with a bit of camaraderie and other people doing it as well. So I'm not sure that I see the problem with it.
I see a problem with it, because I think politics is not a game, and you should not be. The only thing you should be focused on winning is winning your seat, and it does so much corrosive damage at a time when poll after poll shows that people just don't have faith in politicians.
But this is not the reason that people don't have faith in politics.
It's because they're not taking it seriously.
No.
They're betting against themselves. It's ridiculous.
I absolutely disagree with this, because without this conviviality, what happens is that you get adversarial politics that's not healthy conflict.
I don't think this is conviviality. I think there are other ways to be generous and include your opponents other than betting on yourself losing. I don't think this is a necessary requirement for conviviality. You have a choice.
But you don't have a list of things that are convivial. Nobody decides what that is.
I don't think it is convivial. I think it's a really stupid thing to do, and it shows a lack of seriousness.
Look, if you stood for a seat, perhaps you wouldn't do it. If I stood for a seat, perhaps I wouldn't do it. But I don't want to castigate somebody who did do it. It was an honest error by the looks of things.
But the point is that Keir Starmer had been so black and white about any of the issues surrounding the Tories' betting issues that he had to act.
He acted very quickly. He acted very quickly. Meanwhile, today, Rishi Sunak eventually suspends the two people who are being investigated.
But he would argue after a right and proper process of investigation.
Well, yes, he would. But it's come so late that he can't make any political capital out of it. He has this debate tomorrow when we know that this was going to be coming out. The Gambling Commission this morning came out saying that their investigation shouldn't preclude anything that the Conservative leader was considering. And I think this has really cut through with people. I think this is like Barnard Castle, this is like Partygate, this is something that people understand, can relate to. This is not some obscure Westminster thing that only a few people understand. And it stinks. And also, it stinks for Rishi Sunak, because it shows him to be weak and indecisive. For 2 weeks, this has been hanging around like a bad smell, and only today is he doing something about it. When it's been a massive, massive body blow to his campaign, I would say.
Let's move on to the Telegraph, shall we, if I try and find that. This is, the headline says, Cabinet Minister claimed he won £2,000 on an election bet. This is Alistair Jack claiming he won £2,000 on a general election bet, but has dismissed it as a joke. Suggestion he's now facing more questions. A statement from him: I am very clear that I have never on any occasion broken any Gambling Commission rules. Specifically, I did not place any bets on the date of the general election. During May. The period under investigation by the Gambling Commission. The critical point of that is that it seems like a late decision by Rishi Sunak, possibly only in May, to announce the election on May the 22nd, I think it was.
Yes, and I think I saw outside of the Telegraph copy where this story is, I saw his statement, and he talked about having placed the bet in April. So it also doesn't suggest that he had any insider knowledge to that, but obviously he's going to... he's put his statement out. Whether there's any investigation into him remains to be seen. But again, it's something that he said he bet on. He made 3 bets, 2 which were unsuccessful, 1 that was successful. So he took a flutter on something.
What are they doing? They just shouldn't be doing this. They should be above this. And it's quite, he was also boasting about winning. He was boasting about winning. This story has come out because he told the BBC that he'd won £2,100. That's a very specific amount. So it's not like a number that you would say, oh, I won £2,000 or whatever. I won £2,100 placing a bet. And then he says, no, I haven't done anything improper. I didn't place a bet during the period of time when the Gambling Commission is investigating.
But if you just place a bet, guessing it'll be July the 4th, and we've speculated before that Rishi Sunak's children go to private school and they break up on July the 5th, therefore July the 4th is the only Thursday in the second half of the year, before the summer holidays, that it could have been. Is that a perfectly good guess that you've just made there?
There are several different things here. One is insider knowledge. Did you have insider knowledge? The other thing is, should people be betting at all? And I actually think that MPs, especially cabinet ministers, shouldn't be betting at all. But particularly, if you have any kind of insider knowledge, you shouldn't be betting at all. It should be illegal.
So you're saying that nobody in politics should be allowed to place a bet?
I'm saying
so
MPs
on politics,
MPs,
but
yes.
nobody. So I couldn't place a bet in politics, because I would have insider knowledge.
Yeah. I am saying that, like, footballers don't place bets because they are in a position to control the outcome. People who are in a position to control the outcome...
I'm not in a position to control the outcome. I just have particular
knowledge.
You're
an advisor. Former advisor. OK, well, then you were allowed to place a bet.
Okay.
But I think people who are actually actively involved in it...
I hate all this restrictive
I don't think it's a restriction of human rights to stop people who have a skin in the game.
It's a legal act. So, yes, there are restrictions around insider knowledge. That is the restriction and the regulation. That already exists. That already exists.
But I would say I think that's really bad. But I also think MPs should be above this sort of thing. You know, they're going to get 80 grand a year salary. They make enough. There are other ways to have fun than actually putting money on a bet. They could shake hands with someone and have a bet that way, rather than putting money on it.
Would you ban certain types of gambling for people then?
I certainly think that MPs shouldn't be betting on the outcomes of their own seats or when a general election is if they're a cabinet minister. I really, really think there are other ways to have fun if you're a cabinet minister.
Last paper on this, just quickly. The Guardian, fifth Tory faces investigation as election betting scandal grows. This is the Guardian's take. A Conservative politician has become the fifth party figure to be investigated by the gambling watchdog for allegedly placing a suspicious bet on the general election date as the developing scandal continued to overshadow Rishi Sunak's campaign. Should we do a quick word on Assange as well? He's on the front of the Guardian there, front of the Financial Times as well. There we go. This US plea deal broke just as I came off air last night, in fact. Really extraordinary.
Yeah.
Due in this, on this tiny Pacific island, the first part of America that sees daylight, apparently, to plead guilty to one charge and then head home to Australia. But, I mean, really, a fascinating conclusion to, 14 years of battling extradition?
Well, it's a fascinating conclusion, and also what's in the Americans' mind when they're sort of pursuing this, who have attempted to extradite him. Is it because they want to make a point? Is it also because it's election time and they don't want to have to deal with this anymore? So there's a lot of sort of issues and decisions that will probably be sitting behind the State Department that have made this choice. But what's interesting, and you've got the Metro flashed up at the moment, is that there are so many small parts to this. So his wife is obviously delighted that he's coming home, but he now, according to her, is probably going to have to pay for the chartered flights, which is what this £400,000 bill is.
So I did wonder about that when I saw him board it, actually.
Yes,
in the pictures
which he perhaps now, according to this copy, is going to owe the Australian government. So that might be another bill that he has to pay. So this saga might not have ended for him entirely with all these admins.
A book deal.
He'll get a book deal. He'll get all sorts of everything. What's incredible is the odyssey that is ending in this, palm-fringed island in the Pacific that began in it was first he was in a stately home, then he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, then he was in Belmarsh. To some people, he remains a hero, but I think he's a very divisive figure, and it is extraordinary all that he's been through over 14 years. And it sounds like the Australians are very careful in their language about him. Doesn't mean he's a good bloke just because we've made this deal to get him back. I think they're very ambivalent about him, just as many people are. Many people very much still divided about him. He considers himself to be a journalist, but a lot of people would say that he has just, in not sort of drawing out what is journalistically interesting in the data that he leaks, he is basically just a kind of free speech activist who has he's leaked Russian, data that's been hacked by the Russians. He'll leak kind of anything out there. He's done a lot of harm, as well as shining a lot of light on military matters. So, I wait for his book that he will publish to pay for the
and certainly
flight.
the founder of the Frontline Club today suggesting he had not leaked it, but other journalists had leaked the information. But anyway, it's a murk, isn't it? In the meantime, we will have more from Saipan in the northern Mariana Trench as we head to that hearing in, we think, just over an hour. Anyway, we will see what we get from there. Lots more still to come in the next part of our programme. The Telegraph reports on Wes Streeting saying that Labour lost the trust of women over trans issues. That and more after this break.
The Hajj pilgrimage itself, I think we were quite lucky just because we were cycling and travelling throughout the Middle East. We had a chance to accustom our bodies to the heat and the sun, the temperatures, and as we further went south, it did get really intense and a lot more humid, a lot more dry the further south you went. But we had the chance for our bodies to acclimatise, you can say, to the heat.
Once you get there, it's a lot of walking. You have to walk from a lot of different sites where you perform your pilgrimage rituals, and you're going back and forward from the mosque to. You're staying in tents as well, and you're also on one of the nights you're just camping outside with no tent. I mean, it's hot enough to do so, you don't even need a tent. And yeah, you're just carrying the rituals. But I'd say over the course of the 6 days, me and Abdul actually walked. We never took any coaches. We were young and fit, so we actually walked the whole distance.
You've seen a lot of the elderly and mothers, especially, just from exhaustion. The Saudi ministry, they've actually set up a really good infrastructure for the pilgrims. It's all a pedestrian route, and they close the roads down as well because the sheer amount of people there. So there's a lot of people taking several different routes, but you see a lot of people just taking a seat, sitting down at the side of the pathway just from exhaustion. The biggest task out of the 5 days is Eid day itself. All of a sudden, you've got 24 miles to cover by walk. There's no means of transport at all just because of the sheer number of pilgrims. The roads are closed. You can't get close to either the destination you're going to because you're traveling to a number of destinations on Eid day to carry out the rituals. And you see a lot of pilgrims just taking a seat at the side of the pathway. And it's hard to muster the energy to get back up after you're suffering from heat exhaustion.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. We are joined once again by the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Welcome back to both of you. To the Daily Telegraph now, and this is the sort of battle that Labour seems to now be having with J.K. Rowling about trans issues and women's rights. And what does Wes Streeting, Jenny, had to say about it?
Well, he's acknowledging that they they just lost as the headline says, they lost the trust of women. That he says here, you know, in a quest to be inclusive, they ended up excluding and alienating some people, most notably women. This isn't just about J.K. Rowling. He's been engaging with lots of people on social media as well, who want Labour to clarify their position, to come out stronger. And he said quite a few quite strong things here. He said, you know, there's a lot of things that he calls well-meaning but totally misguided approach that said we would write women out of NHS guidance and use phrases like people with cervixes instead of women. And he says, or birthing people instead of mothers, which I think a lot of people felt quite uncomfortable with. And he says, I think this language is kind of dehumanising and degrading. So there's a recognition that you can feel uncomfortable with those changes in language and not be transphobic and not be a bigot and not hate trans people because you want those changes in language. But, you know, this is...
But the difficulty is he's come out this week and says they want to remove degrading language towards trans people and people with gender dysphoria, and yet that is, you know, diminishing for women as well. And this is the balancing act.
You can change the language for both. You can keep the word woman and you can keep the word mother, but you can also make the process for trans people as smooth and unharrowing as possible. And I think that's what he's trying to do. But for some women, for a lot of women, this will be too little, too late from Labour, who for many years did treat women who were concerned about things like changes in language or things about changing rooms or sports as if they were bigots.
Do you want to move on? Yeah? OK, which is to the heatwave. NHS warns of chaos as heatwave hits during strike action.
Yes, and actually, Jenny was making this point earlier, is that we have an election campaign and nobody's talking about the fact that we have a junior doctors' strike, and here we are on the front page of the Telegraph, no less. We are talking about striking doctors. This is very specifically about the fact that we're experiencing this heat wave and what this potentially means for elderly, vulnerable people and other people who are going to perhaps struggle with this new environment. It's also, there was something that I found quite interesting in this, with the BMA saying it would consider crossing picket lines, because particularly there's going to be issues at outdoor events and things like Glastonbury that have been cited. So I think it's interesting for me, from a complete sort of systems service delivery point of view, is that you can start off with an objective, we're going to strike, and something like a heat wave is going to make you ask some difficult questions about how that's going to proceed.
Well, the world looks at us and says, how can you declare 27 a heat wave, don't they? That's the point. Anyway,
we'll take what we can get in this country.
You know, fear for the royal family, the politicians and the military in all their regalia for the start of this Japanese state visit. Unusually going ahead, obviously, because they're normally cancelled during an election. But, you know, roasting temperatures to wear this, I guess.
You wouldn't want to be wearing the bearskin. You know, it is still welcome always to see the King out and about after his treatment. But yes, I do feel for the soldiers in this heat, certainly.
Yes, and a glittering banquet tonight. I don't know if we've got any pictures of that.
I am so looking forward to. I know this is sort of a little bit trite, but I love seeing all of that. I love the pictures. All these stories are obviously picture stories, because you do get to see all the regalia. You get to see these moments of history. But obviously state dinners, state invitations have very important geopolitical purpose, especially with Japan at the moment. Understanding how those negotiations and relations are built, they start at these points and everybody else then follows in governments.
Yes, absolutely. Just looking at some of those pictures from a little bit earlier today. All fascinating stuff. Lots to talk about tonight again. Thank you both very much indeed. Jenny Clements, Alma Shah. See you for the next part of our programme at 11, certainly. And coming up on Sky News, that lacklustre performance from England in Cologne tonight. And more news, of course.